Again.
Thank you, everyone. Welcome to the Finance Committee meeting of October 6th, 2021. The meeting is being conducted in a hybrid fashion with remote access consistent with the current state regulations and is being recorded. Public access to the meeting does not ensure that there will be public participation unless the law requires it. This meeting will not have public comment except in connection with the first item of business, citizen request to address the Finance Committee. First, I will confirm that a quorum of the members of the Finance Committee are present. When I call your name, please acknowledge your presence. Jim Healy.
Here.
Tom Jacob.
Here.
Rick Lunetta.
Here.
Dick Riley.
Here.
Carol Fischetti.
Here.
Chair Josh Levy is here. And I hear some members coming from the hallway, so I'll wait a couple seconds. Barry Kaufman, are you here?
I am here.
Louise Miller
I am here.
and Louise Misgard.
Here.
Where do you want us?
Perfect. Sit anywhere.
Chair is fine.
So as a preliminary matter, I would ask for a motion to continue the meeting to October 13th, 2021 in the event of a technical disruption this evening.
So moved.
Second.
I'll take a roll call vote. Carol,
Aye. Yes.
Tom,
Aye.
Barry,
Aye.
Louise,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Wow.
how do you vote?
Did you call me? Yes.
And Rick.
Yeah.
Okay, and the chair votes yes.
Yeah.
This is the first meeting we're doing in this way, hybrid. So just for people's benefit who are listening from home, there are 5 members around a rectangular table in the Great Plain Room of Town Hall. And there's an owl device in the center of the table. So on the screen at the top of the bar, you see a 365-degree view of everyone in the room. And then as people are speaking, the camera.
Extra 5 degrees.
I'm sorry.
65.
Yeah. Josh.
That's a hell of an owl.
Yeah. Josh, this is just a request, since this is our first time doing this. It may be my equipment, but can you just take your mask off and say a couple things? Because I'm finding it very muffled.
Yeah, is this better?
Much better. Yeah, much clearer. I don't know if Rick or Dick or Jim feel the same way, but I don't want to impose on anyone in that room. But your voice is much clearer when you don't have a mask on. But that's just me.
Everyone in the room right now is wearing a mask. If they feel comfortable taking it off while they're talking, but leaving it off otherwise, I think that would work. Okay. So also the screen, we have a screen on one side of the room. So if we're all looking in one direction, that's the reason we're looking at the screen. So the first item,
They're all really big on.
I know, we're all very
We're all
small.
very small.
Anyway, first item is citizen request to address the Finance Committee. If there's anyone who wants to speak, please raise your hand using the raise hand feature on Zoom. Dave, do you see anyone?
No, I do not.
Then we'll move to the next item of business, approval of minutes of the prior meeting. There are 2 meeting minutes, September 8th and 22nd, both of which were distributed and circulated to the committee. Any comments?
Move to approve both of them. Sorry, move to approve both of them, please.
Second.
Second.
Perfect. So we'll do a roll call vote. Carol,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Barry,
Yes.
Louise,
Yes.
chair votes yes. Dick,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Rick.
Yes.
The minutes are approved. The next item is discussion of Article 11 of the special town meeting warrant. It's a resolution on climate and ecological emergency.
Mr. Chair, I will be bringing in Stephen Froyle and and Allison Phillips, who I believe is actually Rebecca Phillips.
Perfect, thank you. Welcome, Rebecca and Stephen.
Hi, thank you for having me. Sorry about the name. I was on a different account, so appreciate
No
it.
problem. No, absolutely. So the way this usually works is I'll hand it over to you, both Stephen and Becca, if you want to present the article, give a short summary. And then the finance committee will probably have some questions generally related to the financial impact of the article.
Yeah,
So,
great. So yeah, I'll just briefly give an overview of what a climate emergency is and the benefit to the town by declaring a climate emergency. And then Stephen also can basically jump in with some information about the financial implications of this, because I'm sure that would be very important for you guys. So this coalition has really been a movement from various different groups in the town. I was a Needham resident the past couple of years, and I grew up in Needham my whole life. I went to Needham High School. And so now we've been collaborating with Green Needham. I'm also an organizer with the Community Rebellion Boston, and there's been various church groups who have been involved, and then Equal Justice in Needham. So it's been really very much an inclusive town-wide project. Now what a climate emergency is, so basically it is a commitment and acknowledgement by the town that they will be performing green work and very much addressing the fact that we are in a climate emergency. And over 2020, there's 2028 jurisdictions as of October 1st around the world that covers 1 billion citizens that have declared a climate and ecological emergency. Specifically in Needham, the intention of the article is that the town of Needham will go on record as of being aware of the climate emergency that we're in, and request the town of Needham through the select board prioritizes work to lower the town's carbon footprint, ultimately to reach a net zero carbon footprint, net zero greenhouse gas emissions. And then in turn, this will mitigate the impacts of climate change on town residents, businesses, and organizations. It's important to note that the climate emergency resolution itself is non-binding. However, passing it will send a very strong message that the people of Needham care about this issue and that they expect the town to follow up on its commitments and make through the climate action plan. The climate action plan is ongoing right now, in progress. Stephen has been working really diligently with a lot.
I think we Becca's
Did we lose
video.
Becca?
Yeah, we did.
Shall I pick up while where Becca was going on that?
If you feel comfortable, yes.
Sure. Yes. So the select board has prioritized work on a climate action plan for the coming year. And they've just recently voted to establish a climate action plan committee, which will be building on that work. And that work will essentially identify and prioritize specific projects that the town can undertake that will reduce its carbon footprint while also achieving other goals for the town, be it building new buildings, lowering its energy bills, or switching its fleet, modernizing its fleets. Each one of those projects in the climate action plan will go through the standard processes in town, go through with the relevant boards, committees, town meeting votes, if there's any appropriations that are necessary. This resolution doesn't actually touch upon that. It really just lays the foundation for those future activities. Becca, it sounds like you're back. You froze there for a moment.
Oh, did I freeze? Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Right.
Okay, yeah.
Yep.
So I was just talking about how Massachusetts actually has a roadmap bill in place that basically sets a date of 2050 for all towns to achieve net zero carbon emissions. So this will help us achieve that. And also, Wellesley has declared a climate emergency. They declared it in fall 2020. So there are various towns just around in Massachusetts that have declared a climate emergency. So I think it's important for Needham to also take part in this. And I think the most important thing is that it binds Needham together. It really shows that we're committed to green work, and it will make it easier for different organizations like Green Needham, like the Select Board and the Climate Action Plan Committee to actually perform this work. There can be more budgeting that's allocated. And it also sends a message to other officials at the state level and even eventually the federal level that this is something that we need to prioritize. I'm sure most of you have seen in the news a lot more different climate related disasters that occurred just this summer, from Hurricane Ida to different wildfires to, increased heat here. And actually in 2020 alone, there were over 20 climate and weather related disasters that cost the US over $1 billion in spending. So I think that's also an important point, is that we often think about just what money we need to put in right now to really have people be stable, especially with COVID, and to prioritize the best education for our kids and our well-being for our kids. But it's important to also think about the future and how us prioritizing something like a climate action plan and climate emergency resolution could actually limit our spending of different climate and weather related disasters in the future. That's a future focused point, but I do want to make it because I think it's easy to think about the present. And I think this is something that requires a lot of foresight into the future, which can be difficult. I don't know if Stephen, do you want to talk more about the other parts about the finance related to the climate emergency declaration and solar panels, et cetera?
Yeah, just briefly, again, just to reiterate, there's no appropriations that are actually defined in this bill, and there's no binding requirements upon the town. It's really, we do see this as somewhat a signaling. So about, according to polls, roughly 70% of people in Needham believe that climate change is serious, that it's affecting us today. And roughly 60% believe that the local governments should actually take action on it. So largely it's a signaling bill. It's an opportunity for the town to go on record. Again, from an appropriations perspective, individual projects will be prioritized by select board, other committees in town, school committee, et cetera, and go through the typical appropriations process. To the extent that those appropriations will go back through town meeting, it'll be important to have town meeting already on record as saying that this is important work for us to do, and that should help support future votes to support the actual project. So I'll leave it there.
Okay. Thank you. That was helpful information. I guess I have one question. The operative part of this is simply a recommendation that to the select board to declare a climate and ecological emergency. Is that correct? Or the specific actions that are listed further below, do you interpret those as actionable items, or items that town meeting is specifically recommending to the select board?
I'll just briefly, so it might be a little confusing, because basically what happened is that an earlier draft has stated that the Needham's town meeting would itself declare an emergency, and then the moderator actually reviewed the article before we had people sign it, and they actually suggested, and they said we should use the wording that the select board is on board with this, but ultimately the vote will be in the town meeting. Stephen, do you want to clarify anything that I said?
Yeah, Josh, Mr. Chair, the recommendations that are in the resolution are examples of some of the things the town could do to actually address its carbon footprint. I do think that the key point here is that because the select board has already established a climate action plan committee, a lot of the actual recommendations for the town and the prioritization will come from that committee. So this is more of a sense of town meeting with some examples of things that could be taken on by the town. But the climate action plan will provide those recommendations to the select board. The select board, working with other committees and boards, will prioritize the specific projects to take care of our carbon footprint.
Thank you for that answer. I see Dick has his hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to dig down into the financial implications of this proposal. I understand that the proposal in and of itself has no direct or immediate financial impact. My question is, and I'm going to use words that will sound judgmental, and I don't mean them to be, but is this in effect putting a thumb on the scale of when you're weighing the financial cost versus the ecological benefits? Is this intended to say, on balance, more weight should be given to the ecological aspects rather than the financial costs?
I can actually handle that, Becca, if you want me to.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
then
I-
I'll jump in if I
Yeah.
see fit. Yeah.
It's a good question. Actually, I think it's more of an and, it's not an or. And so with every project that comes forward, there's always an opportunity to consider the ecological as well as financial. Often those point in the same direction. So for an example, with public buildings and housing today, there are now many net zero buildings that have been built in Massachusetts. They are almost identical in cost, differing only by 1% usually, but from a cash flow perspective are net positive in year one. And over the life of the building can save thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on the size of the property. Similarly, when making fleet choices, increasingly electric vehicles are a much lower cost from a maintenance perspective and an operating perspective. And so what we're really asking the town is to consider ecological alongside its financial decisions. And hopefully increasingly because of technology advances, as well as from state and federal grants that help support greening. And once again, the Massachusetts Roadmap Bill, which commits the state and all of its cities and towns to reducing carbon footprints by 2050, there will be lots of grants, grant programs available. And so there's an opportunity both through technology advances as well as those grants to have everything pointing in the same direction.
I guess my concern is,
Yeah.
if both the ecological and the financial elements point in the same direction, then it's a non-issue.
Right.
So basically what I'm coming down to is, when is it viewed that this particular resolution will have impact?
So we do want the town, and if this passes town meeting, we do want the town to prioritize this and have it equal with other priorities. And obviously not all the time, those are going to point in the same direction. And sometimes based on whatever the priorities are at the moment, it's going to go from a financial perspective, or it'll go from an ecological perspective if those two things are not pointing in the same direction. But that's ultimately going to be up to the select board, the other boards, committees, and ultimately town meeting when appropriations are being requested for those arguments to be weighed and decisions to be made. So this particular resolution won't necessarily have an impact on those individual decisions. We're just trying to convey the sense of Needham that we want to prioritize it at least equally with other priorities in town.
I'm just going to follow up really quickly on that. What Stephen said is that it will help if we have to make these decisions for Needham to then consider the ecological ramifications in line with the finance. And I think it will also, if we think about all the different green options that actually can save us money over time. I mean, I drive a Prius and it costs me less to fill up on gas than it does just in my own life. Then what we're saying is that the town of Needham is going to consider in their financial, and with the finance committee, that people will start to consider, okay, what's good ecologically and financially together, and how can going green actually save us money? And so it's more about a priority, but it doesn't mean that, let's say the town wants to put money into education or put money into another public works project or something. It doesn't mean that the money can't be spent for that. All the things that we're going to really think about our carbon footprint. We're going to think about the ecological impact while also thinking about the finance. So it's not going to steal money. It's just going to make our decision making maybe a little bit more, deep.
Let me suggest where this could arise.
Yeah.
When we're faced with an issue that it looks like the short-term costs of taking the ecologically advanced approach is higher, but there is a strong perception that long-term benefits will accrue. I take it this resolution would try to weight the longer term versus the short term.
I think it's a very good example. I mean, we met with the PPBC recently to talk about net zero construction. And often when buildings are built, we think only about the dollars spent to build that building. We don't think about the operating costs over the course of the life of the building. Those aren't factored often into the decisions that are made. We'd like those decisions to be considered, and specifically as well, what are the carbon footprint of that building over the life of it as well.
Question. So you made the comment that several thousand communities globally, or more than that, have declared a climate emergency. Are there financial advantages in the form of grants at all for taking this action right now? I mean, is there an incentive for a community in Massachusetts to declare a climate emergency?
Mhm. That's a great question, because the tricky answer to that question is that climate emergencies do vary a little bit depending on where they're declared. And you will see actually some climate emergencies as like an entire government, like the UK government has declared a climate emergency. And you can see in opinion polls over time, the priority of citizens like viewing climate change as an issue has changed from, I don't know, 10 or 12 to like number 3. And then that's going to influence obviously the economy in the long term and prioritizing green decisions. But the point being is that the financial implications of declaring a climate emergency are basically in line with how a jurisdiction will prioritize that. So it really is also about the action that we take after declaring the climate emergency in line with the climate action plan, et cetera, and how we choose to balance finance and green work. However, we first need to have this legislation in place, and it will help people consider green work in regards to financial implications. I don't have like studies available to show whether financially one thing is better in terms of like declaring climate emergency. However, I do know that climate emergencies have influenced a lot of green work in different towns and jurisdictions where it's been declared. And then finally, I just want to say that the more towns that are declaring climate emergency right now, so there's actually a movement in Massachusetts right now to declare climate emergencies. I think there's there's over 25 right now. I can't remember exactly. So that includes Wellesley, that includes Arlington, that includes the Cape, like a lot of Cape towns. And so if more Massachusetts towns are on board, then it will be easier in the long term to collaborate and consider the financial decisions together and in regards to the state, because eventually we're also going to have to transition to net zero no matter what to achieve the roadmap bill.
Yeah, I would just add to that, probably to directly answer your question, I don't know if there's a direct financial benefit to declaring a climate emergency. It's probably a second order effect. Acknowledging that there's a climate emergency would allow the town to make decisions like we did last year to become a green community. And becoming a green community did open the town to need them up to grants, competitive grants at the state level through the Green Communities program. I believe we already received one grant for that, and we hopefully applying for others in the future. The Massachusetts State climate roadmap bill actually outlines a number of grant programs that are to be defined over the coming years, codified. And there's also a net zero building construction code that's in development at the state level. Net zero building codes are designed to get buildings highly efficient, electrified, hopefully, and then very low carbon footprint. And we'd like the town, when that is available, to adopt it. So I think from a direct perspective, again, directly, there's probably not a direct financial benefit, but it does set the town up for decisions that hopefully will allow them to take advantage of those grant programs as they become available.
Thank you.
I was just going to ask, maybe if instead of, we could always hypothesize how, and we'll never get a definitive answer how this is likely to play out in the future, but maybe looking in the recent past of decisions that have been made, do you see any that you can point to that would have been altered, or where this would come into play in a different way than any discussion regarding those decisions were made. My point really is that obviously the carbon implications of all the major decisions that have been made in recent years have been taken and will be taken. I mean, it's just the mindset of people in this town that they're very aware of this and very sensitive to it. And I'm not sure what
What would have been different? Yeah, I mean, there's probably a few, and this is Monday morning quarterbacking, so, but let's play it out. If we had been a green community 8-9 years ago when that first came along, we probably would have applied for a number of grants that would have offset some of the projects that we actually paid for out of taxpayer money. So that possibly could have saved us, hundreds of thousands of dollars over those years. It's possible that we may have made different choices about different projects that we've completed, including, for example, the field house, the Memorial Field House, which is not solar ready on the roof. I don't think we have solar panels on the pool, the Rosemary Pool Complex. So there's probably a number of decisions. Had we had a mindset of looking at the environmental impact of our decisions alongside the financial impact of those decisions, we might have been able to find some win-wins that could have addressed our carbon footprint and reduced taxpayer operating costs for those buildings. So I think those are a couple of examples. There's probably others, but again, it's Monday morning quarterbacking at this point.
I was actually thinking the SUNY Williams School, because obviously that's like an enormous amount of energy, and that was built relatively recently. And I think eventually our schools are going, because there's so much heating and cooling that happens there, and there's so many people that go. Eventually, we're going to have those buildings be net zero. So if we could have kind of gone back in time, as Stephen said, and been like, well, we're already pouring all this money into building a school, why don't we also think about making it carbon neutral from the get-go? And that will eventually reduce our costs. And now we don't have to spend money again to make that building carbon neutral.
To add one more example, just because it's current, the warrant article to work on the Emery Grover renovation or replacement. I read the feasibility study from cover to cover. And nowhere in there is the operating cost or the carbon footprint of the different options discussed, which seems like a missed opportunity to look at the building and say which one of these buildings could potentially, over the life of it, save us the most money and the lowest carbon footprint. So I'd probably put that in as another thing we might have changed had we had this in place.
So I have a few comments, if I may. So first off, we have been working on making our buildings not only energy efficient, but I would look at the PSAB building where are using a completely alternative source of energy.
The geothermal.
Exactly, to heat and operate it. So
that's right.
This is something that is not new in Needham. There's a difference between climate action plan and net zero and energy. So right now, so first of all, I'll also say that grants are also taxpayer money. They're just a different type of taxpayer money. So right now, what the available grants are for climate are based upon hazard mitigation and municipal vulnerability. I would assume that that Needham, like other communities, has completed hazard mitigation plans as well as municipal vulnerability plans. Those make us eligible for climate related grants. With respect to energy and net zero, the governor has I think it's an executive order, has issued an executive order that all municipalities are to do that by 2050. This might accelerate it. If we consider it, I don't think it's going to make any difference to the town of Needham. One question that I would have is when the board of selectmen are reviewing some of these projects and looking at the costs or looking at the climate action plan, I would ask that, perhaps there be some member of the town staff who are able to review what the federal and the state executive orders and legislations are, and make sure that we do comply with all of them, of all of the opportunities, and that this not be prioritized over their criteria. By declaring it an emergency, I think the word emergency makes it a higher priority perhaps than other things. So those are my comments. I think in the long term, it probably does not have a financial impact unless we're really reprioritizing or are going to spend more funds in order to meet certain objectives that are not legally required objectives.
And if we are going to do those at that time, the finance committee will be able to judge those particular action items.
Exactly.
Can I just
That's correct.
Can I just ask a question back to you? I'm not sure your name exactly. Is that all right if I ask a question back, or?
Yeah, you can.
Sorry. Okay, yeah, no, I think you make phenomenal points. My one question, do you see a negative in declaring a climate emergency? And like, do you not believe that there is a climate emergency? Like with the wording, I think that's actually a very important part of it. And I know that that's actually kind of one of the components to it, and that it's hard, I think, always to think about that, but that's also part of the reason for actually declaring it, is to think about it as an emergency that we need to prioritize. I know this has to do less with the financial, but it's also, if you think about like emergency funds, like when the governor declares that COVID is a public health emergency, then there was more funds available to actually really deal with COVID. And I know it's not exactly the same, and I'm not as versed in finance because I haven't sat on the finance committee, and I'm more coming at it from kind of the grassroots activism community. But I would just be interested to hear your perspective about that.
So you actually hit the nail right on the head. That is exactly my concern, is that by declaring it an emergency, it would then lead to the spending of funds that may not otherwise be spent because it is an emergency. And a number of times you mentioned Green Needham in your presentation, and they are not a town committee. They're not part of the town. And so I would be, I don't know that I would say the word concern, but I would not be in favor of using taxpayer monies to fund non-town projects because something has been declared, because a climate emergency has been declared.
Okay, that's very fair. I just want to throw one back at you. Sorry, never mind.
I think I want to give some other members of the committee an opportunity to ask questions.
Okay.
Is there anyone else who is? Okay.
Gosh, I'll chime in.
Go ahead, Jim.
I think the town does a fantastic job of looking at all building projects and making a decision what is in the best interest of the taxpayer, both from the building of the project, but also as to the impact that it may have on a lot of other issues, one of which is ecological. And so what I worry about is that this gives this, as Dick Riley said earlier, this gives it kind of an imprimatur or tipping the scale. And I don't believe that's appropriate. I think that the Finance Committee needs to look at every project when it comes up. It needs to look at every request for spending that comes up, and then weighs all of the issues that are before it. And all of the issues very well will include the concerns that the two of you have. But whether or not we think that those concerns trump other concerns, well, that's something we can't decide right now. And I do worry that the Finance Committee, which is a non-policy making board, it's an agenda-less board, We don't have a motivation for one particular issue or not, political or otherwise. And I do worry that it sets forth kind of a suggestion that we believe that future projects are going to need to be pushed toward the direction that Becker and Stephen want. So whether or not you support these efforts, and some of you may, some of you may not, whether some of you believe all of the information that comes out with respect to climate ecological emergencies, whether you do or you don't, whether you think they're understated or overstated, those are all opinions we can have as citizens, but as members of the Finance Committee, since there is no financial implication by this, I would strongly suggest that we not take a position.
Yeah. Thank you for that comment, by the way. And I think that would be our preference would be if Finance Committee did take a position that they come out in favor of it. But if they're not going to do that, I think not taking a position is also certainly one that we would feel very, very pleased with. So.
Okay. I tend to agree with Jim, actually, that this is, town meeting members will certainly decide this issue. But I think that the act of town meeting members making a recommendation to the select board itself does not have a financial implication. So for that reason, I think I would vote to take no position as a finance committee. But for future items that come before us, I think I anticipate that there will be items that have financial implications. So
On a case-by-case basis.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think
Dick.
Mr. Riley has a question.
Yeah, I just want to dig into the issue of whether this does or doesn't have financial implications. If and to the extent that this is a statement saying that the long-term ecological cost savings, I'll pick up on Jim's term, trump the short-term costs, then it could be conceived to have financial implications. So what I'm wrestling with right now, is there a 10-year payback period in mind, a 20-year payback, or is there any concept associated with this as to how to weigh the long-term versus the long-term savings versus short-term costs? Is that inherent in this, or is that to be left to each item as it comes up?
I'm going to let Becky respond, but I would say, Dick, that's up to us. That's up to really the finance committee to weigh that.
Well, unless this is interpreted as saying the town meeting is instructing the town government to make those trade-off decisions one way or the other. And that's what I'm trying to dig into.
Go ahead, Stephen, Rebecca.
Yeah, I think two things. One, I just remind everybody it's a non-binding resolution, so it says that right in the title explicitly. So there's nothing that requires the select board or the town to take on any of these projects. But from a prioritization and a return on investment perspective, that's very clearly going to be left up to the select board, the finance committee on every individual project. My understanding is that the climate action planning committee will be prioritizing projects with an eye towards what are the projects that the town can take on that either have a net return on investment from a financial perspective, and which are sort of no-brainers, or which ones might need an investment and have some sort of return with respect to meeting the state mandates on climate reductions. I mean, I do want to reiterate, we're bound by that law. Needham is bound by that law, just like every other city and town. We can put our heads in the sand, but we will be required to hit zero by 2050 and 50% reduction by 2035, I believe. And so I think there was a comment earlier that the town needs to prioritize projects, but not go beyond the statutes. And I do think that's probably in the that's written into both the resolution and the state law. So,
Mr. Chairman, we've given this a lengthy amount of discussion, and I respect Dick's viewpoint. And frankly, if I thought there was a majority of people that would support Dick, I might support him also. I'm not sure that's the case. And I'm not sure we have sufficient information in front of us to make a decision whether or not there is or is not a financial implication, either now or down the road. So I guess I would make a motion at this point that the Finance Committee take no position with respect to this article.
And I'll
Second.
second that.
Okay. The motion and second. Do you want to speak?
No, he covered.
Okay, go ahead, Becca.
Just very quickly, regardless of whether you decide to take a one stand or no motion, I completely respect that. I do ask though, if you are interested in learning more about the financial implications of going green, you can look into the social cost of carbon and discount analyses. But just please, just like if you think about the future, just envision, I'm talking like further along in 2050 when there is forecast that there is going to be like flooding. And if you just envision the future in terms of that, and you envision the costs that will be associated if we do not mitigate and adapt to climate change, I just ask that you like research it to learn for yourselves, and just to consider that in the future, and to consider the fact I am the youngest person on the call, and this is my future. This is your future as well. This is your kids' future. This is your grandchildren's future. And I know that it's really hard in New England to see the impacts, but I just do ask you, just like from the bottom of my heart, to just really consider that in how you move forward, regardless of whether you support the motion or not, and regardless of the other financial implications. Just please look into that. Thank you.
Respectfully, Ms. Phillips. I was born and raised in the town, been here a long time, been involved in a lot of government organizations. I have 3 children, okay? Some of which are younger than yours, some of which are about the same age as yours. I don't need to be lectured about what the potential of climatological dangers are. I think we've been very, very professional, very receptive to all the comments you've made, but there's a lot of different opinions out there. And I've told myself, don't get into a debate about what other sides may think about these issues, because that's not before us. You've been very respectful, but right now I think the Finance Committee has heard you and we're willing to take a vote. I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Jim. So I think there's a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Okay, we'll take a vote.
I would just like to add that I would hope that the minutes reflect the understanding of the committee that each project that comes before us will be evaluated both on the short-term and long-term considerations, and the appropriate financial decisions will be made.
And on its merits at that time.
Yeah.
Yes, they will certainly reflect that. Okay, so we come to the vote. Louise.
Yes.
Carol. This is
Wait.
the vote to take no position.
Ah, thank you. I was thrown off by the yes.
We'll start again. Louise,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Barry.
Yes.
The chair votes yes. Vic.
Yes.
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 Rick, you vote yes? I
Yes.
heard you say.
Yes.
Perfect. So the Finance Committee takes no position on Article 11. Thank you, Becca, and thank you, Stephen, for your time.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
The next item is Article 12. Dave, are there people who are attending remotely for that?
Yes, and let me bring them in. Oscar Metz is coming in. I do not see. Here we go.
Okay, thank
I
you.
don't see anyone else.
Welcome, Oscar. We don't, oh, there we go. You're on mute, but welcome. Can you hear us? You're on mute right now. What we'll do is, as with the last article, we'll give you a brief time to present the article, and then the Finance Committee will ask you questions regarding its financial implications. Go ahead, Oscar.
Okay. I don't think I'm going to read this. I'm just going to, I have just a couple of things to say. This is a petition.
I can't hear it, Oscar. I can't hear you.
Yeah, Oscar can't hear you either.
You're very quiet.
Can you hear me?
Better.
Okay. How's that?
If you maybe talk closer to your microphone, it would be
How's
helpful.
that? Is that better? Hello?
Marginally.
Hear you.
Better.
Go ahead.
Okay. So what I'd like to say is I will not read the citizen petition. I don't think that's necessary. I'm just going to say that a few things about this issue, if that's okay.
Yes.
I'll be to the point and as fast as possible. I appreciate your time. By definition, an ADU in Needham is a self-contained small housing unit within the main dwelling and is intentionally of minimal impact to the character of the neighborhood. The restricted size of 850 square feet further distinguishes the ADU as a highly valuable commodity in this town. An affordably sized housing option for young people, young professionals, people working in Needham, or perhaps someone downsizing in.
Gosh, it's really hard to hear Oscar.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I don't-
Ross.
I don't know if you have a volume button, Oscar. I don't know if you do.
Headphones you could plug in?
The audio, if
About that.
you,
Is that
the
better?
adjustment next to the microphone. It's, pan,
No.
no.
That's about the same.
Yeah, on Oscars.
I don't think it's on our end.
I think
Um,
it's,
I don't think it's not.
I don't-
our- yeah.
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 Can you hear me?
It's very
Very
quiet.
faint.
If, what we could do, Oscar, is we could take the next article and come back as you fix your mic. How do you, that sounds? There's also another option. You can call in. So there's a call-in number, I believe,
Okay.
on the invite. So that might be better. So in the meantime, I think we'll go to the next article and then we'll come immediately back to this. Is that all right with you,
Okay,
Oscar?
Thank you. Apologize for the technical.
Okay, no worries. Okay, so we'll move next to Article 6, the Ridge Hill demolition. Dave, is there anyone on the call?
I think Mary Ann is on the call.
Weren't we just looking at the question of how much contingency was needed?
Exactly.
I don't think we need to talk about the whole article again
Right.
unless someone else wants to, but I
No, I
think we
agree.
were just looking at contingency.
Yeah, and my understanding is that a different number was presented to the select board, so I think they may be able to present that to us tonight.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dick.
Yeah, I happened to participate in the PPPC meeting on this and represented that our view was that we should cut down any excess contingency. And I represented that we would, if it turned out that unusual circumstances created the need for it, I represented to them the Finance Committee was open to and would take prompt action on request for reserve fund transfers. Based on that, they indicated they would cut back on my word, not theirs, padding in the contingency element and go with a basic contingency package.
Okay.
Did they give you a number, Dick?
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I think there is a number in there and they've cut it back by, what is it, 60,000 or?
Dave, why don't you speak to that?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The PPPC did reduce the project budget, and it is now at 603,091, and that is the amount being sought. I also provided for the Finance Committee that it's with you in person at Town Hall. And I don't know if it got distributed electronically yet, what the breakdown is for the various funding sources in addition to the tax levy, what specifically those prior articles represent. And specific to the question that with the appropriation at $603,091, the amount of the appropriation that would be funded from the tax levy has been reduced to $181,900 $1,075.
Okay. And Dave, is that going to be presented as an amendment at town meeting?
Mr. Chair, I'm not certain if it will make, yes, there is still time to change the article as it appears, so that the lower number that has been voted would be in the warrant.
So just so I can be clear, the reduction, the amount that they reduced the contingency is by?
50,000.
Well, what do you say?
The amount was reduced from 650,666 that was published in the previous warrant, and the warrant that will be distributed will have the figure of $603,091. That's 603,091.
So my only question, Mr. Chairman, is thinking back on the conversation, I know John Conley involved in that. I thought John, and I think Dick, you also were looking for a little bit more of a reduction. Perhaps I'm wrong, but if you can clarify, and or is this number okay based on your review of it? I asked through the chairman to Dick, because I don't think John's here.
Yeah, go ahead, Dick.
Yeah, my understanding is that John questioned the need for, is it the 3% cost escalator, on the ground that there weren't going to be any significant materials involved in this. So he questioned the need for that. My understanding is they dropped the others, consistent with what our suggestion was from to more standard items, but that was the item, and I bow to John's expertise in this area on terms of whether or not the cost escalator is required or not.
Mr. Chair, do you want to take a vote on this or wait for John? How would you like to proceed?
So I think Mary Ann was meant to come and speak to this, as well as Mike Redsky, I believe. But go ahead, Louise.
So I can't vote in favor of this article at this time, just because I can't support raising any money from the tax levy for something for demolition of the Ridge Hill right now. There's no reason why we can't wait until the spring. It appears that most of the funds, most of this can be funded through turn back in other articles, and I would hope we could fund the rest of it through free cash. I just cannot support increasing the tax levy for this.
Okay. Are there other comments? My preference would be to perhaps wait until later in the evening when we have Mike Redsky and Mary Ann to make a final vote. But in the immediate term, are there any other comments? Okay. Why don't we see if Oscar Mertz is available again and come back to Article 12.
I will bring Oscar back into the meeting.
Thank you. Cool. Yeah.
Contingency, there's three numbers in contingency.
Right. There were, yeah.
I just can't remember what they are, and I don't have the right folder with me.
Oscar, can you hear us? You're on mute, or your phone is on mute.
How's that?
Yes.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Go ahead, Oscar. We're running a little behind, so if it's at all possible.
So I shall go ahead. By definition, an ADU in Needham is a self-contained small housing unit within the main dwelling and is intentionally of minimal impact to the character of the neighborhood. The restricted size of 850 square feet further distinguishes the ADU as a highly valuable commodity in this town, an affordably sized housing option for young people, young professionals, people working in Needham, or perhaps someone downsizing and wishing to stay. At the moment, almost all those options don't exist, and there continues to be a frustrating lack of small affordable housing choices in Needham. This citizens petition is intended to emphasize the urgency of this critical need for small housing units by advocating for the removal of the residency restriction in our current bylaw. Our Board of Health and Council on Aging did research and ultimately advocated strongly for the consideration of a less restrictive ADU bylaw when this issue first came before town meeting in 2019, because the research indicated our senior community is facing housing challenges to be able to age in place, and an ADU as a rental unit would be a helpful option. We believe there is every reason to change the bylaw policy as soon as next spring's town meeting, because ADUs are a very specific housing option that can only positively impact our town with the immediate creation of small rental units to serve those who currently cannot find an affordable place to live in Needham. The data in Needham shows that we are seeing about 4 to 6 ADU applications a year with the current restrictions that they are only for caregivers or blood relatives. There is a projected increase based on a lot of the research that's been done about ADUs, that there is approximately a 50% increase, or 3 units a year, which would be added if the restriction was lifted. And these became rental units, on the market. So there is clearly a demand now for these affordable scaled units. Adding 7 small rental units a year would actually be a big deal and provide housing choice that does not really exist, legally at least, yet in Needham. By making ADUs rentable, there would be a simplification to the building department's enforcement currently needed to monitor residency restrictions. The other advantage of ADUs to date is that they literally can occur anywhere in town, and they actually do, and with minimal impact to their particular neighborhoods. A few fiscal impacts are that these units can be built on existing lots and typically without any cost to the town to provide infrastructure or utilities. In other words, the town is adding literally affordable housing to town without requiring local funding by the town. The second benefit is that the individual property is likely to be going through an upgrade and expansion by the homeowner, which preserves existing housing stock instead of tearing down and replacing, so it would avoid some negative environmental impacts. A third benefit is the likely increase in assessed value to the property following the improvements to create an ADU. A fourth townwide benefit is that these important small units provide affordable housing for public sector employees, social services professionals, service sector workers, daycare instructors, teachers, nurses, home health care aides, seniors, and young families. These are underserved groups, are important to Needham, and we should work hard and quickly to start finding housing solutions for them. ADUs are one housing option that could easily be implemented, and there's really no good reason to wait.
Chairman.
Thank you, Oscar. Jim, I'm going to ask one question first, the same question I asked in Article 11. My understanding is that the operative part of this article is to recommend that the town of Needham, acting through the select board, declare making more affordable housing choices a priority. I guess, Oscar, is that correct? Is that the only part of this that is actionable, or are there other parts of this that
No, this is a non-binding resolution, and it's to ask the select board to urge the planning board to address this issue sooner than later, and to consider that this is a bylaw change that is worth doing sooner than later. It's sort of it's funny because you talk about it as such small numbers. So why do you spend all this time doing it? But the reality is 7 really small affordable units is actually a lot a year. And I think to add 7 rental units to our market in this town could provide some much needed housing. We have nothing at that size in this town. We have very limited choice at the end. Obviously, the average cost of housing in Needham is going the other direction. So it's really a consideration of this, the urging of this to be considered soon. That's all.
Okay, thank you.
So it's not. Yeah.
So, excuse me, Oscar, it's not only soon. To me, the way this is written, I don't understand why it's a resolution and not a bylaw change, because you're suggesting in the text that the planning board prioritize this for annual town meeting 2022. So in fact, there is
a timing for that. Yeah, I think, if I may say, I think it's just that the timing was not there to have the planning board be able to evaluate this and draft an article for the fall. So we wanted to put this in as a citizen's petition to have the select board be able to vote to support this and others to support this so that it would come before the planning board as an article in the spring. So we understand this, there just wasn't time to evaluate this and draft this as a bylaw change for this town meeting. The time for that to be done, to evaluate it and draft it with the planning board.
Thank you. Another comment I would make though is that then there is insufficient data and or time for us to evaluate the financial implications of this resolution, albeit that it's non-binding, but so I don't understand why you need to do this now. Why can't this wait until May town meeting when the benefits and the ramifications can be vetted by all the relevant parties?
So what you're saying is if by February I were to draft a warrant article to suggest the bylaw change myself and do it with, I'm sure, I mean, I can do that. But I guess this was to ask that this be considered by the select board and the planning board to do that themselves. You're right, I could probably do this. Is that what you're suggesting, I think?
Well, I think the form of the petition is the petitioner's choice, and they chose to ask the select board to do it.
So I'm becoming concerned that town meeting is being used as a way to have the select board and other executive boards take actions. I think citizens should be going directly to those boards if they would like the executive boards to take action. So
It's certainly their choice, but
it is. And I'm just getting concerned that we're seeing more and more of these, and they're really to request action by the executive branch who come up for election and presumably are running on platforms that.
Well, and I'd like to add one thing to that, Louise, that I think this is I'm not going to use the right choice of words, so I'll apologize, but a backhanded way of getting legislation passed, because you are asking town meeting to sign a non-binding resolution, and they may agree to it, they may not, but then if they do, then they might be presented with then a warrant article that they have to evaluate, and then then the issue is, well, you signed the non-binding resolution, so why wouldn't you agree to this? So you are actually asking town meeting members to agree in advance to something they haven't evaluated. So
I guess I would let Oscar respond, and then I'm going to go to Jim, excuse me.
So I guess one of the things that I appreciate that, and thank you. It's great for all your suggestions on this procedurally and how best to address this issue. I guess I come back to the fact that we addressed this in town in 2019, and there was a lot of research and a lot of advocacy to make a decision on a bylaw and a direction with that bylaw and how, whether it's restrictive or not. And so there's a lot of water already under the dam on this. So it's not a new issue. And there's a lot of passion in town, a lot of research that's been done, a lot of advocacy that's going on to advocate for a bylaw, a different bylaw. And so I think I'm just asking that this go back in front of town meeting and be addressed again, instead of waiting another year or 2 years or 3 years, whenever a governing body like the planning board may decide that it's time to do it or to address it. You know, there are lots of things on the agenda. So I'm just curious how you would advise. So I
want to make sure. I don't think it's really our role to advise citizens on how to submit a petition. So I have to be in that position. Jim, go ahead.
So, Mr. Mertz, you have a wonderful idea, and it may be in the best interest of Needham. I don't know, but it sounds like a great idea. I know there's a ton of people that can't live in this town anymore. You know, a lot of people moved here 40, 50, 60 years ago, and And now their kids want to move here and they can't. They're out in Millis and Medway and Milford. So I understand what you're saying. I respect your passion, but I have to agree with all of my colleagues. Unfortunately, I don't think this resolution is the way to go. I think you should work with the select board. I think you should work with the planning board. They are elected officials. And I think you should get them to study your proposal, come up with a proposed bylaw. And if they don't, number one, don't vote for them. But number two, I would come up with my own proposed bylaw. And I'd work with the planning director, Lee Newman, and say, listen, I'd like to come up with my own citizens petition bylaw. But I think that's the way to go. I know that Josh doesn't want to give any recommendations or advice, but I'm just a regular schmuck, so I'm giving you some advice. But unfortunately, as a member of the Finance Committee, I don't think we should support your article. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Dick, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with anything that Jim has said. I am sitting on what's known as the Future School Needs Committee. And in that context, we work with a demographer who has pointed out that the change in Needham populations is almost entirely driven by families moving into town as older families move out. And that the birth rate in Needham is so low that we don't replenish our population by ourselves. So without saying which way I would come out on this issue, I think it does have some significant implications for residential turnover and how that should be evaluated. So I think this is a complicated issue that needs some significant analysis.
Thank you, Dick. I guess my opinion is in the context of the previous article where we took no position, I would suggest that the Finance Committee also take no position for the same reason that the immediate impact is not clear financially. As a town meeting member, I may take a different position, but that's how I feel as a Finance Committee member.
I actually think I would suggest we take a position against this article because I agree with Carol that essentially what this is a resolution for a specific bylaw, which we will then have to comment on, but have a vote of town meeting on the resolution behind us.
Are there other comments by members of the Finance Committee?
Mr. Chairman, I'll go ahead, Rick, I'm sorry.
Just a couple of thoughts. If memory serves, back in 2019, there were significant members of the population that were afraid that these particular units would encourage B&Bs and all kinds of other things that would change the complexion of the neighborhood. And so I'm not sure that if you brought this to town meeting floor, that you would get the positive response that maybe you're intending by this. I think what Jim has suggested relative to not moving forward with this methodology and maybe telling something more directive to Lee and her team may be more appropriate to you. From a finance perspective, I can't vote in favor of this because there's too much of unknown. And I think your efforts would be better served taking up your gift here and doing something else with it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that the Finance Committee recommend not to adopt this article.
Second.
Okay. Is there further discussion?
Yeah, I just want to make one comment. I'm torn here because I don't see where there's the financial implication. I feel like if we take a position, it seems inconsistent with other non-positions we've taken, even though I agree with the sentiment that this is not a as a town meeting member, I would not support this. As a Finance Committee member, I'd prefer not to take a position.
Any other discussion before we take a vote? Okay, so the vote is to recommend against adoption of Article 12. Louise, how do you vote?
Yes, against adoption.
Carol?
Yes, against adoption.
Tom?
Actually, I need a little advice here. Because I would like to make a motion, but I don't know if I should have done that prior to this one. So this one probably has to be resolved and then I would have to take a motion. Is that correct?
I agree.
Okay, so I vote against the motion.
No, okay. Barry?
Yes.
Okay, the chair votes no. Dick?
Yes.
Rick?
No,
Jim?
Yes,
Okay, so the motion to recommend against adoption passes by, what was it, 5-3? Yeah.
5-3, yeah.
Tom, did you want to make a different motion?
Well, I'm not sure it'd be in conflict. We've already made my motion would be in conflict with the one that was just passed. I don't
Okay.
think that's not good. That would work.
Okay, did you want to make a different comment? Or?
No, I think I made my comment. Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Sounds good. Okay, so I think that's the work of the Finance Committee. Oscar, thank you for your time. And we'll see you at town meeting.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
The next article is Article 10, home rule petition for off-premises alcohol licenses.
And Mr. Chair, I'm going to bring in Marcus Nelson, member of the Select Board.
And I'm already here, Mr. Chairman, Dan Matthews.
Excellent.
I may not have heard.
Can you all hear Dan Matthews? He's in the back corner of the room.
Come up.
You're welcome to.
Since they
Okay,
didn't respond, so I guess is no.
All right.
go ahead.
Rick, can you hear me?
I can, loud and clear.
Welcome, Marcus.
Hey, Marcus.
Send you.
Hey everyone, how we doing?
Good. So I'll leave it to Marcus and Dan to give a brief presentation, and I'm sure we'll have questions.
Yeah. Everyone should, I sent Louise a little squib text about summarizing what the article is about.
I don't think I received that.
I don't think I got that.
I don't think I got that.
I do not have that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, well, I'll try to,
I read the article.
I'll try to go briefly through this then. But I'll pick up at the, since I think a lot of you folks were in or around town meeting 7 years ago, when, or 9 years ago now, when town meeting approved allowing for the first time since Prohibition, package store licenses in Needham. At that time, one of the tensions was between, well, how many licenses would we have? And at that time, I believe it would have been, if we had simply adopted the regular state statute, would have been about 12. And a number of people who were opposed or critical or skeptical of this move to package store licenses were concerned that the town would be saturated with them, and were saying, I remember remarks like, I can't see how the town would possibly need more than 2 or 3 licenses to serve. So as it was the article was adopted and went through the home rule process and approved by referendum with a reduced quota, which had some expansion capacity in it, but it basically maxed out at 8 licenses total, no more than 6 for all alcohol and no more than, and then the others would be wine and malt.
How many of those others? 2?
2. So you could have 8 licenses, so 6, and in fact, that's exactly, we now have, after a period of years, all of those licenses are outstanding, 6 all alcohol and 2. And I'll just say, this is all about package stores. We have a standard restaurant license quota, which we actually haven't issued all of, and this is only about how many package store licenses are you allowed in Needham. The board had held a couple of licenses in reserve up until fairly recently, but since the election, there's been change of reviews of the board members of this, and some very good qualified applicants that had come in. And some of those changes of perception were of members that have been of long standing. So a decision was made to issue the remaining licenses, but it also, we feel that that's kind of an artificial cap. The program has worked fairly well. our big limiter is not throwing the licenses around town, but making sure that each applicant that we approve a license for is qualified, is in a location that's appropriate, and can be relied on as best you can tell to be a good business in the neighborhood. So our proposed solution to this is now to switch to the standard state quota for package store licenses, which is the same, would be the same as for almost for the majority of cities and towns in the Commonwealth. And when I say the majority, most of those that are not at that actually have the base quota, and then they have special allowance allowing one or two or some other of additional licenses. That's a population-based quota, and based on the base number of one of each category, all alcohol or wine and or malt, for every 5,000 or fraction thereof. Based on our current population, that would give us a total quota of 7 all alcohol and 7 wine and malt. So what that would do in terms of changing the current, what that would put us in the bank for if we have additional qualified applicants in the future, we would have 1 all alcohol and 5 wine and malt. And there is some interest in neighborhood business centers being able to have wine and malt, and particularly if we're talking the ecological advantages, people can carry their beer home instead of having to drive. I hope that's not too facetious, but we think it's a pretty basic change to deal with a condition that was uncertain in the past that we now really feel, no, Needham is pretty much like other comparable communities in this area. This would make sense. We are setting it up to go through the same path as in the past, though. So this is a town meeting approval to the state legislature for approval as a home rule petition, and then back to the voters. So if they say that this is too much or they don't like it, they'll say no, and we'll go back to the drawing board and do something else. So we think it's not quite housekeeping, but it's only one step beyond that. But I'm prepared to answer any questions. And Marcus is here as well.
So my first question is about the population figure. So 1 for every 5,000, would mean that Needham has 35,000 residents, right?
Yeah, 1 for 5,000 or fraction thereof. So the current population is 32,091. So that makes 7 of each.
Okay. Do board members have any questions? Go ahead, Dick.
That may be the population, but I just happened to see at this demographers meeting the other day, 26% of that population is under 18. So are we factoring in that in terms of the necessity for licenses? Secondly, what are the economic implications? What does the town get? What revenue comes out of a license, and is, as a business, are these more profitable in terms of tax generation for Needham than a hair salon or nail salon?
I would say, and this is a little out of my area, but I'll give you my best area. One, the quota based on population. In 1933, there was a high percentage of the population that was underage, 21 at that time, and that 5,000 quota, the 1 per 5,000 or fraction thereof, that literally dates to 1933 as the statewide way of calculating how many package stores you put in a community. So it's not affected by the youth. The other test for us is we know, because we've turned away qualified applicants, that we will at least have some applicants, and then as businesses develop over time, that we'll probably have some more. In terms of the money, we have license fees for these package stores, and they more than pay for the cost of overseeing the licenses, but not by a lot. They're not, to my way of thinking, a big moneymaker for the town. What they are is a gatekeeper to restrict the operation of selling, what is storing and selling a potentially hazardous material under some circumstances to people that are qualified to do that. They do have, the licenses do go in the retail setting. From my observation, they have a certain anchor effect in some neighborhoods where they really do add kind of a synergistic benefit either to other businesses that are the other activity of the businesses. We don't have any supermarkets right now with a wine and malt, but I expect it someday that we will, and that will be an adjunct. And I think particularly of the location of the crest, which those who go back far enough, that as with the decline of newspapers, that became kind of almost a blighted location in the sense that there was no real business that would fit there in that real cornerstone location of our downtown. The package store that's there has been really I think most people think it's been a real good addition to the neighborhood, and it has synergistic effects with other businesses that are service oriented in the neighborhood that people walk to. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
I guess I would just push back a little bit on develop what Dick was saying. So compared to an open storefront, alcohol store is certainly going to generate more taxes compared to a store that would be there otherwise, compared to a pizza shop or compared to a hair salon. Would an alcohol store generate more taxes?
I actually don't know that. Maybe Dave or the assessors could. Certainly, the assessors would really speak to how it is that they value retail business properties. But if you look at our downtown Needham, we've got a pretty fair number of underutilized storefronts that are there. And although I wouldn't want to be loading the place up with packaged liquor establishments, having a couple there, I do believe has helped the overall foot traffic in businesses around the neighborhood. And that business itself is a true, active retail use that has, I think, a pretty decent value attached to it, although I can't speak to the detail of what that is.
Jim, go ahead.
Well, I knew the Morans, who actually took over the crest at one point in the 1970s. And so I know what you're talking about, Dan, and I do agree that particular location has done great for the downtown area. I do wonder about the business owners who have the licenses currently. Number one, there is a value to that license. And in the event they ever tried to transfer the business, it's not the business that's worth the money, it's the license. And so by now putting in another potentially 6 more licenses, the value of that license obviously goes down. I don't know if that's an important consideration, but it's the fact. I do also wonder about business. These businesses all now need to compete. I always thought that when we had the 6 that we were going to put in initially, and I guess 2 more from the ramping up, my concern at that time was, are we setting up kind of an unreasonable competition? Because we want these businesses to succeed, obviously. And so I just wonder if, by putting in potentially 6 more, whether that might impact their ability to be profitable. I do question the notion about availability. In other words, is there a sense that you can't get to a Packy and get a little snap or something? I mean, I'm not sure that's a problem. You can probably go every half a mile and you're going to probably find every one of them. And I don't know if this is in, I think we have an economic or downtown development person or whatever it is, or some study committee. But I wonder, is that how they want to see Needham continue to be developed, by adding potentially 6 more of these venues? So I'm not necessarily against it, but I think there's just a lot of other questions. And maybe since I'm the knucklehead that's supposed to be speaking on this, if someone could not only send me what you already sent in, Dan, but maybe if you could kind of address all of these. And Mr. Nelson, I haven't had a chance to meet you, but welcome. At least first time I've had a chance to meet you, and happy to hear whatever your thoughts might be also. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Could I speak to Jim raised a couple points, maybe.
Yeah.
there really is a question. There's no, at this point, for the most part, there's no question that the public can be adequately served in Needham by the number of licenses that we have outstanding. The only possible exception to that is we're still looking at eventually that there'll be walking retail in the apartment areas of the industrial center down Second Avenue and so on, that will eventually develop. We no longer have, and that was one of the reasons why in the past the board had reserved some licenses, that might be something. So there is a question though of whether or not, when all your licenses are out, that becomes an absolute barrier to entry for business competition in this industry or segment as with any other. If we want to have that barrier to entry, you wouldn't do this. The same is true on the question of the resale value of licenses. Once all your licenses out, they start having a resale license. Now, remember, these are licenses that we gave to the qualified applicants. They pay an annual fee, but they didn't pay anything for the property value of having a license in a place that has that's at quota. Dollar values of package licenses historically, they don't get the way the restaurant licenses do and the nightclub licenses in some cities where you see restaurants paying $300,000 and $400,000 to buy a license. But certainly you could see a failing operator or struggling operator of a wine and malt or even a whole package store license hanging on because they know if they can sell that license to a stronger operator that has no way of coming into town for a quota. That's a real kind of economic regulation and protectionism versus laissez-faire argument that is for others to settle. I think the impression, my understanding is that the majority want assuming they're qualified businesses, they want them to be able to compete with each other. And I do think the majority of the select board does not want to see the licenses gain an intrinsic sale factor value other than being a license. Like with a restaurant license right now, we have enough in the bank that a restaurant comes in and applies on its own merits. In a place that's at quota, they have to go buy one from another business in order to come in. I think the select board doesn't see that as a plus for the town. So that tries to speak. So there's some value judgments in there, and you can make your own. I think we are saying add to the quota, limit them to qualified applicants. Remember that of these new licenses, 5 of them are restricted to wine and malt, which is kind of a niche activity. It may not be as big a change as some might think.
Go ahead, Tom.
Your explanation actually conjured up a question for me. On a resale, does the new applicant have to go through the select board for approval?
They had to go through the new applicant. The applicant has to come to us. It becomes a transfer. They would have to come to us for approval, and they would have to satisfy us that they are a qualified operator and that their proposed location is the right one for the license to go to.
So they have essentially the same process. As
same
the original
process,
applicant.
but they're just paying. They're just making another payment that we get none of.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Rick.
question for Dan. If the ones we have, the licenses are out right now are sufficient to serve the town, but to give the board some wiggle room and to keep what you're suggesting in terms of the bartering of licenses at a minimum, would 2 additional in your quiver be beneficial for that logistical shuffle as opposed to the number that you're asking for? Or is it just reshuffling chairs on the Titanic? Does 6 make a difference as opposed to 2? What would give the board sufficient wiggle room and still maintain not the fighting at the license level?
Yeah, I think the reason for suggesting just go to the state quota to end the argument You could have another approach, but since our feeling is that our Needham quota was set by a referendum, to have a referendum every time you're gonna have a new package license. We think it's just simpler to ask the question, do you want to go to the full license or just stay with what you've got?
Yeah.
And if the decision were, well, we don't like that, but we're not really happy where we are, well, then we can have some other discussion later on. This is the clean solution. This is the rule that's in place in probably a couple of hundred towns across the state.
Gotcha. I can appreciate that, but what Jim said a couple of seconds ago struck me. If we were to allocate, because I would imagine if a legitimate business came to you requesting a license and they had everything in order, you'd be hard pressed to say no. Do we want 6 additional stores of this nature in this town? Like who is going to put a barrier on that and not be discriminatory in judgment? Is that, can you address some of that?
Yeah, I think, remember that most of these 5 of these new licenses, of the 6 new licenses, 5 are wine and malt. And the last wine and malt that we issued went up to the little general store that's in Birds Hill by Hersey Station.
Gotcha.
They have it's a very limited kind of a neighborhood use. So we don't really see this as something to flood the market. And of course, each applicant has to come in. Now, if you ask the 8 license holders, should we increase the license quota? I'll bet you could probably get an 8-0 vote against there. It is a serious, competitive, highly regulated businesses with the same kinds of changes that affect all kinds of retail. But we, by and large, feel that we've had a good sector, but that and we've been careful in administering it. But the idea of flatly prohibiting entry is I think, and I don't mean to be speaking for the whole board, I think it's a kind of a protectionist direction that they would not see. If the businesses are honest and follow the rules, then let them go.
Go ahead, Barry.
Obviously, this doesn't obligate the distribution of the licenses. It just gives us the flexibility if businesses approach us. And I think one of the things that was interesting to me is wasn't the last license, or maybe it wasn't the last license, but the Baker's Best.
Yes.
And so it was a license to have private wine tastings. And they needed the license in order to do that in a private setting. It's not a retail establishment. And so it opens up the potential for things like that, they would have been prohibited because at the time there was only one license left, and it was being held back for who knows when, whether it's something in the business park or not. But I think the market will dictate, who's a good operator and who isn't. And I don't think that's up to us. And hopefully the select board, goes through a thoughtful process when everybody goes forward. And given the process that has to be undertaken in order to do this, I actually agree with just opening it up to our limit based on population now, and let the select board pick, make the decisions as the applicants come forward.
Dick, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm troubled by this because I have a couple of unresolvable questions in my head. First is from a finance committee perspective, what are the clear financial implications? The most I can twist out of it is the business per se is not essentially different from any other business, except to the extent that it revitalizes an area. And so one could argue that from that perspective, it could be beneficial to the economy. On another note, I'm troubled by, in effect, giving the select board discretion to make this decision, which I think is a decision that would be very mixed within the town. But what we're saying is your call, select board, you decide how many get issued up to the maximum, and that's your call. And I find that a little difficulty, but I'm not sure that that's a finance committee issue.
So Dick, I think state law requires the select board to deal with these issues and approve any permits for alcohol.
The same with
I totally agree, but right now, the town has put a cap on how many they can issue. This would take the cap off and then leave it up to the total discretion of the select board as to how many are issued up to the maximum.
Right. So I
Except
think-
that
Well, so one other thing is, I think there would be a vote, so it would go to the voters. It's not just town meeting, but then there would be a
Yes.
ballot
Yeah.
initiative, so that all the town-wide residents and voters would have the ability to weigh in on this. Just as they
Only, Josh, what Dick is saying is, once the whole process is over, once it's all done, then it's just simply within the discretion of the select board. Dick, is that
Right.
right?
That's true,
Yes.
but the whole process ultimately ends in a referendum vote, which is exactly the way that we got the 8 licenses that we've got now.
Okay, good.
But I think the economic impact is just allowing more businesses to come to town. I mean, right now,
Yeah.
there is no way for an additional business that sells alcohol to be consumed off premises to come to town. Whether, I mean, I could understand objecting to this on a moral ground. Maybe you don't want alcohol license, more package stores in town, but from a financial perspective, I think it can only be positive and not negative. Are there any other comments? Okay, is there a motion?
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to. Where's this? 10, thank you. I make a motion that the finance committee recommend adoption of Article 10, home rule petition off premises alcohol licenses.
I'll second that.
Further discussion?
I'm just wondering if we could tie this into the need to either be a pizza joint, a bagel shop, or a nail store.
Or a bank.
A pizza shop is limited to one per 1,000.
Could you have a alcohol truck?
I have no further discussion, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Jim.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was a good question, actually. Like, could there be a,
Could there be an alcohol truck? Like, could you try it license? Can you do that?
No, because it's tied to a fixed premises. But a lot of these places, like the one that Barry mentioned, their business is 95% delivery.
Mhm.
okay, so there's a motion and a second on the motion to support or recommend adoption of Article 10, home rule petition for off-premises alcohol licenses. Carol,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Louise,
Yes.
Barry,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
and
Yes.
the chair votes yes. It passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Marcus.
Shut them up.
Okay, next article is 4, zoning for outdoor seating.
Mr. Chair, I'm bringing in Lee Newman. And Marianne Cooley.
Paul Albert.
I am not seeing Paul Albert.
I'm saying
He's sitting in the room. He's sitting in the
Adam.
room.
Hi, Dave. Hey, look at your monitor.
Ah,
Come around the corner.
Clark is here too.
Yeah.
Chair and vice chair.
Okay, please go ahead.
Outdoor seating. Adam is the one who's going to handle that at town meeting, so I'm going to let Adam.
Thank you, Paul. Mr. Chair, members of the Finance Committee. The Needham bylaw provision, Article 6.9 sets out the conditions under which outdoor seating is allowed in town. And we've learned some things through the pandemic and trying to provide some relief to business. And one of the things that we would, that we've discovered is that it's a benefit overall to the town And then we'd like to extend this outdoor seating on a bit more of a broader scale, but still within certain limitations. So this article extends the circumstances under which the planning board and the select board may authorize seasonal temporary seating in 3 ways. First, the article extends to all eat-in restaurants this expedited permitting process that we refer to as a minor site plan review, currently offered only to restaurants that have waiter and waitress service. That's the first way. The second way is the article grants to the select board the discretion to approve the use of a parking space located either in a municipal parking lot or within a public way for outdoor seating where the select board finds, after holding a public hearing, that pedestrian and vehicular traffic, parking for patrons of restaurants, retail establishments, and other service businesses in the vicinity of the outdoor seating will be adequately provided for. And finally, the article grants the select board the discretion to allow outdoor seating outside of the ordinary temporary season, which right now begins April 1 and ends on October 31. So in the event we have a warmer spring or a warmer fall, there's discretion there to extend it accordingly. That's really the bulk of, that's why we're doing this.
I think it's a great initiative. I think it's really good to have restaurants be able to have outdoor seating. I noticed 2 things. So I think there's a missing quote, close quote in B, item B. In the 4th line is
Which article, which provision is this? This is B.
Yeah, B.
So this is, Lee, are you able to follow? We're looking at as follows provision B.
Provision B, the 4th line, is permitted during, and then there's no close quote. You might want to address that before town meeting.
Well, wait a second. Where was this? I don't see it. So can you just point it out to me so I can get it fixed tomorrow so it won't be in the warrant incorrectly? Thank you for the catch. What is it?
Immediately before item 3, B3, I think there's meant to be a close quote.
I know where you're talking.
You're saying before
It's
the
the
word.
4th line down in subparagraph B.
There's opening quotes before is permitted, but no closing quotes.
Oh, okay.
The second issue, so I just had a question about temporary outdoor, so seasonal temporary. If the select board is authorized to extend outdoor seating before April 1st and after October 31st, they could potentially allow it January through December all year long. So is it then a seasonal temporary in that case?
So, I mean, the intent, I'm going to defer to Mary Ann to answer that in a second. For now, Mary Ann.
Go ahead.
Josh, is it okay?
Go ahead.
So the select board will also be publishing, some guidelines for how this would work in a policy, for how it will work from their perspective, that will recognize that time period of December through, March, sometime in March is snow plowing season. So any request for outside of season is something that will be considered with that context to see whether it is possible in consultation with DPW.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions?
So I have a question, because you mentioned that this just applies to restaurants that have waiter or waitress, or will this be extended to all?
It's extended to all eat-in restaurants. Not takeout restaurants, eat-in restaurants.
So,
Example would be
so it's
Bagel's Best, which has tables
right?
and it's an eat-in restaurant, but they don't have wait. They don't have wait service. Under the current regulation, you have to have wait service
In order to have outdoor seating.
in order to have
okay,
outdoor
so-
seating. So we're removing that restriction so that it would apply to all restaurants that have indoor seating. They can have outdoor seating, whether or not they have wait service.
Okay.
And did you say this would only allow on seating in municipal parking lots or any parking lot?
So there's a distinction made between the planning board and the select board. The distinction is the planning board has jurisdiction over private property, and the select board has jurisdiction over public property.
So are you going to allow outdoor seating on private property as well?
Yes,
But
the planning,
it's-
yes.
Okay.
Somebody would come to the planning board.
Okay.
And in most circumstances, they can come with the minor project application, which is a
And then-
streamlined process. But there are some situations where they would have to come with a major project
Okay.
for a special.
And with the approval for the use of public or any parking, is that permanent or is it reviewed annually? How is that going to be?
So I'll defer to Mary Ann on that if I may, because
So-
parking would be applied.
I'll let Marion go, but I think there's probably a two-part question because the planning board and the select board are operating independently in some cases.
But with respect to private property, the application is made for, for the business, and it would survive for the duration of the business.
So it would be yes. So
So I
what,
guess it's more
what
of a-
Adam is suggesting, and I think maybe the planning board would have to discuss how we're going to handle that, whether we're going to require renewals of the licenses every year. Like, for example, the farmer's market has to come to us every year to renew their permit.
Okay.
So I think the planning board has to discuss whether, when we grant the permission, whether it's going to extend from year to year, the dates that we set out in the permission, or whether we're just going to require that they come back to us each year.
And that would be discussed as our normal deliberation process and questioning of the applicant and how they intend to operate their business.
Marion, is the select board going to operate? Well, can you describe how they're going to operate?
So the select board will review it each year as part of the annual license renewal process that each restaurant already goes through. So they will have the option of doing their outdoor seating request at the same time. They could come in at an alternate time, but it will be reviewed annually as part of that process.
Thank you.
And just, I don't know how it's done currently, but the Jersey barriers and the other items that are out there, is that cost borne by the town, the restaurant, the combination? Who's paying for this currently?
So we're actually looking at setting permit fees that will cover a replacement cost over time of those Jersey barriers. Okay, most of those, or many of those, were purchased actually through grants that we got during the pandemic. All right, but they have a 15-year life cycle, and it is intended that the permit fees that we set will cover the replacement costs of those.
And one more question. Some of the restaurants have done a really nice job decorating, making it very pleasant. Others have done less. Is there regulation on how much they can do and who's monitoring what's done?
I'll defer to Mary in a second, just to say that there is a design review board. That's typically part of the process, but Mary Ann, do you have additional comments?
So the answer is that those were all funded again by outside grants for the course of this year. And we are hoping that everybody has the opportunity to have some lovely Jersey barriers to accompany their outdoor seating. But the designs were done in consultation with the businesses and then came in for review and approval before they were actually implemented. They were implemented by community artists. And we would hope to continue it for anybody who doesn't already have something like that.
Thank you.
So it does seem to me that this has a positive financial impact. It allows the restaurants to serve more people, and it definitely brings more people during the summer.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's great. It's a great idea.
I would move that the finance committee recommend adoption of, what article number is it? Four. Article number 4.
Second.
Second.
There
Everyone
are
seconds.
3 seconds.
So anxious.
Third. Fourth.
Okay. Is there further discussion? Okay. Louise,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Barry,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
Are you frozen?
Jim,
Dick?
yes.
Jim is yes, the chair votes yes. Can you hear us, Dick?
I vote yes, yes.
Unanimous. Thank you.
We appreciate your affirmative support.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Before the
My report.
next article is Article 5. Before we go to Article 5, I'm just going to say that I'm going to abstain from this article because I have an interest in a property in this district. So I'll let Carol Fischetti chair this discussion.
Real estate mogul, huh?
So, Lee, do you want to, are you speaking on this article or?
I'm gonna have my friend Paul, the chair.
Perfect.
Lee,
Carol,
do you
can
want
I
to-
interrupt for 1 second? I'm sorry to interrupt, but Josh, I'm just trying to help you out here. Do you say you have a potential conflict?
So,
I'm trying to help, not hurt.
no, I appreciate it. I think in the interest of having no appearance of conflict, I'm going to abstain because I do have an interest in a property located in this district.
Okay, well, let me, just so you know, because I've been down this path, unfortunately, too many times. The Ethics Commission's position on these things is that if someone thinks they have a potential conflict of interest, they're not only supposed to recuse themselves from the deliberation, they're actually supposed to leave the room. Now, I'm not suggesting, because I don't know your particular circumstance. So I'm not here to tell you whether that's appropriate or necessary here. But, you know, as someone who likes you a lot, I'm just saying that's some guidance.
Thank you, Jim. No, I do appreciate that. I am more than happy to leave the room. Thank you.
We will miss you, Josh.
Days office is around.
But we did take note, Jim, that if you didn't like Josh, you wouldn't have offered that advice.
Next day, it'd be in the front page of the Globe.
Okay, I will speak to this, and I think I can be brief, because I've already been working in my head as to what I'm going to say to town meeting. So, but I'm glad that Lee is here, because if I misspeak, Lee, because I'm going to speak to the history of how we got here, please correct me, Lee. So, because of the history of amendments to the zoning bylaw over the past 30 years, it has come to our attention that there is a technical glitch in the frontage, the front setback rules for the Chestnut Street Business District, and which also creates kind of a typo in the definition of what a business district is. Historically, we had a business district in town. This goes back pre-1990, probably into the 1980s. And there were various sections of the town that were designated business district. Over the years, all except one of those business districts became other districts with their own rules. The Chestnut Street Business District being one of them. Historically, it was business district. In around 1989, 1990, the zoning was changed. We created the Chestnut Street Business District. There is only one section of town left that is actually designated business district. That's along the western side of Highland Avenue from May Street to Rosemary Street. So it includes the plaza where Bertucci's is, and it includes Sudbury Farms. And that's it. That's the only area that is now business district. All the others that were business district, we have Chestnut Street, we have the center of town. They become their own districts, and the rules have changed for them. But it was a very haphazard, over time situation. So what happened was, originally, when we created the Chestnut Street Business District out of the original business district, the intent was, and what was drafted, what we thought, I believe the 1989 Planning Board had, was 10-foot frontage, a 10-foot setback for the frontage setback, which was the old business district rule. But we created a 20-foot frontage along Chestnut Street, because Chestnut Street was what we were really looking at. We weren't that concerned about the side streets. So, and we wanted to have more, so we created a 20-foot. This past year, we had a situation, everybody thought that we had a 10-foot front setback for a property that's on Oak Street that was recently redeveloped. And there was a mistake made, an honest mistake made. It was not a deliberate mistake, an honest mistake made looking at the plans of record, where they thought that the building was actually 10 feet away from the property line. But because there had been changes in the plans over the years that the surveyor didn't find when they presented the plans, the building got built and it was actually only 5 feet from the property line. And so in order to get their final occupancy permit, they had to look at that, and it was discovered through going to the building inspector, who made an opinion, who came to the planning board, and we agreed with the building inspector's interpretation, that because of all the changes that were done over the years, the side streets, Chestnut Street had a 20-foot setback, but the side streets actually had a 0-foot setback. That 10-foot setback that we thought was there somehow had gotten lost by the wayside. And so the planning board is saying, the intent has always been a 10-foot setback on the side streets. We want to continue to have it as a 10-foot setback along the side streets. And so we need to do a zoning change to make it that way. This particular parcel that has the 5-foot property line setback, they've gotten their occupancy permit. They are protected as of now, what will be, if this passes, a pre-existing non-conforming. So that property, as long as it stands, doesn't need to be torn down. If that building is ever torn down and a new building is built, they'll have to go back to the 10-foot setback. This is a very narrow district. This district on the, I guess it's the west side of Chestnut Street, only goes from Chestnut Street to the MBTA tracks. It's actually the right of way, so it's a little less than the tracks. And on the east side, it's a very narrow strip. There's only one side street there, which is actually Junction Street. So I believe that the only property that's really affected by this on the east side of Chestnut Street is the VFW Hall. And the VFW Hall is actually set back very far from Junction. So in all probability for a long time, whether this is changed or not won't affect that property. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that since there's no longer multiple areas that are business district, having the phrase a business district with a small b and a small d doesn't make sense anymore in one particular place. We're just changing that to be the capital B business, capital B. Very technical changes, but that's what we're doing.
And so are there really any financial implications to this one way or the other?
I don't see really financial implications to the town. There would be financial implications to the property owners, because if a property owner could have a 0 setback instead of a 10-foot setback, they might be able to build a little, tear down what they have and build a little bigger building. But all the properties that are there now have at least a 10-foot setback, because
Which, by
that's
the
what
way,
everybody thought they had.
Which, by the way, we don't want that. We don't want buildings with a 0-foot setback.
Yeah.
That's not in the
Yeah.
public interest. So this is designed as a technical measure to correct that deficiency.
But it won't change our tax base.
Right. Dick, you had your hand up?
Yeah, two questions. One was going to be the financial implications, which I agree, they don't appear to be any. And just a technical question in the paragraph number 1, should business district in the first line be underlined? Because it's a capital B, capital D.
No, what's underlined are the words that we're changing. The new language was underlined. And
So
the
it
language that
is
was being
capital B,
modified.
capital D right now,
That's correct.
but none of the others are. Okay.
That's correct. So
As
it's,
opposed to, we're changing it to the.
Yeah.
Thomas Weiss.
This is gonna take 2 hours of time.
You have to realize the planning board consists of 5 members, 3 of whom are lawyers.
Which is why it takes so long.
And
to call a meeting.
two of whom make a lot of sense.
Okay. Madam Chair, I move that the Finance Committee take the position that there is not some material enough financial impact of this for us to take a position.
A second.
Okay, let's, in Josh's absence, let's just take a voice vote. Louise?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Barry?
Yes.
I vote yes. Dick?
Yes.
Dick?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
Great. Unanimous. It passes. Thank you.
Madam
Thank you.
Chair,
I'm going to declare a conflict of interest because this was going to be my article.
Josh, is your name Roach, by the way?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next article we're coming back to is Article 6, Ridge Hill Demolition. We have Marianne. Do you know if Mike Rexky is on the phone?
He is not, I don't believe he was expecting that to be back.
Okay, that's okay. I guess we'll address any questions we have to Marianne. Dick, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to strongly disagree, respectfully, but strongly disagree with what Louise said at the end, which, as I understand it, was rather than address this through tax levy, we should defer until funds were freed up from other articles. So we should not take action at this meeting, but wait. I just am concerned that we've all read in the paper about the professor that fell through the decrepit bridge and was killed. This is $161,000, which is maybe 1/10 of 1% on the tax levy. I'm not suggesting we should be indifferent and cavalier about it, but this will only get spent if needed. And I am concerned that we defer, if we defer this is a real hazard out there. And I would just be very upset. We would all be if we deferred it and something happened to someone because we hadn't taken action when we knew there was a problem.
Thank you, Dick. Any other comments?
So I would ask Dave whether there's a mechanism, and I don't think that there is at this point, to reduce the reserve fund, which sits at a very large number right now, to partially fund this article.
Mr. Chair, there is not, you don't have a, how that would have been done is you would need an article for the operating budget to reduce the appropriation.
I mean, I see Louise's point. I mean, I am not, ideally, I wouldn't want to really be spending tax money to demolish a building. I mean, no plans for the future for this site, no immediate plans. I think since May, we've had a lot of productive conversations with the select board, and they were able to find ways to reduce the tax burden quite a great deal. I mean, I guess I'm inclined to call it a compromise and you know, acknowledge that the hard work that the select board and the finance director were able to do in finding other funds. So I think at this point, I would support Article 6. Are there other comments or a motion? Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion. I'll make a motion to approve Article 6.
Second.
Further discussion? Okay, we can come to the votes. Louise?
No.
Carol?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Barry?
Yes.
Dick?
Yes.
Yes. Sorry.
And Rick both vote yes. Jim?
No.
And I vote yes. So the vote passes 6-2, I believe. Okay, thank you, everyone. The last item on the agenda was just a brief discussion about a priority-based budgeting pilot. So there are two departments that I'd like to do. I think I discussed this September 8th. Pilot of priority-based budgeting for the planning department and the building department. We circulated a template of how I think this could work. The whole idea is to look at the whole budget and rather than our typical way of looking primarily at DSR4s. So by looking at the whole budget, we just have a bigger picture. It's certainly a bigger job, which is why we can only really do this for a couple departments at a time. But if it went well, then we would hope that maybe we could do other departments on a rotating basis in the future. I circulated a template, or Louise circulated a template of how this could be done, looking first at the goals of the department, and then seeing what the metrics are supporting those goals, so that we can track the progress of those goals over time. And then a second step would be aligning the program and the programs of the department to the goals of the department. And in that way, I think that'll be a helpful way for us to review the town's budget. I think if we are going to do this, though, I think it's going to take a little bit of extra time, and it may be helpful for the liaisons to meet earlier rather than later with the department heads to discuss at least certainly the first component, the goals. Were there any thoughts about the process?
So how would you, since planning is mine?
Yeah.
How do you, how are we introducing that to them? What's the next step?
So I think the next step is having a meeting with, I was thinking just the liaisons to make it less intimidating, and so meet with the department heads and talk about the structure. I think the first part, the goals, should definitely be done before aligning the programs to the goals. I think one of the big questions, though, is what level of granularity to list the programs at. And that, I think, has to be collaborative between the liaisons and the department managers, because in the end, the department managers are also going to have to aggregate all of this information at a particular level. And so we want to make it informative for us, but hopefully not overly burdensome for the administrative staff.
And then this process would start before Kate has vetted their budgets with, where are we starting this?
So I spoke to Kate, and Kate envisions that this will probably happen in parallel with Kate's budget process.
Okay.
So we could probably start it independently.
So how is this different from what is already being done?
I think typically what we do is we take Kate's budget and we scrutinize mostly the DSR4s. In our liaison meetings, in the liaison meetings, we certainly discuss the operations of the department, and we do look at other, the DSR2s, you're right. But in my experience, and it's shorter than everyone else here, so you're right, you can correct me if I'm wrong. When we're all around the table discussing the budget, there are often questions about various functions of the department, and we seem to be, in some cases, surprised about functions that departments either are or are not performing. And I feel like by making this part of our budgeting process, at least on a rotating basis, then we'll become more familiar with the departments.
So I think that that's what the liaisons do. It's just not brought fully to the full committee, because otherwise we would spend a really long time on every budget. When the liaisons meet with their departments, we spend a couple hours. And with some departments, it might be even more than one day worth of meetings to go through all of their budgets. So I just want to make sure that as a finance committee, we're reviewing everything. But budget guidelines were already issued. And, you know, the department managers, as they're putting their budgets together, do need to understand, like right now, what they're supposed to do so that we don't receive something when we expected something else and now there's extra work they need to do as a second step. Like I wouldn't want to do that. I did not review budget guidelines. I don't know, did we get budget guidelines? No.
I didn't send them out to the whole committee. You can do that. I found them.
Okay, because I think that if there is anything that we're looking for that is not in the budget guideline, we really need to include those now. And I would still hope that liaisons are doing this work.
Well, I think too, part of this, the genesis of this was that, you know, in almost every budget cycle, there's those things that we didn't know because they had extra money from X, Y, and Z. So they
did certain things, right?
Try that, and I think that's what we're trying to smooth out, those surprises, if you will. I mean, that was how this.
Yeah, I mean, the reason
started.
why I identified these two departments is because, well, for two reasons, based upon their size, they're not, you know, too
They're not
large
huge,
and they're not
right,
too
right,
small,
right.
but also based upon their turnback over the last 3 years, they have a relatively high average turnback.
Okay.
What's the second one? I'm sorry, besides planning is.
Building department. So they, you know, do permitting inspections.
Right,
things like
right,
that.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, part of this, I mean, we're having this discussion, it was really started with zero-based budgeting, right?
Right,
Let's-
right.
What is this what's the purpose of this department? If you were gonna build a planning department from scratch, what would you do? And is, you know, because over the years, things just, you know, they just start from where they ended, and we always, even though you're right, the liaisons go into more depth. The reality is we don't really question what was done before and as a starting point necessarily. And I think that's really,
Okay.
and maybe it doesn't need to be, maybe we just have to go in with that mindset is that you know, don't have to do a more formal type of, you know, formalize it and, you know, or frankly, maybe it is a good idea to formalize it. But I think the point is really start thinking like, do we need 20 people in this department to provide the service that they're supposed to be providing the town?
Or is there another service that they should be providing
Correct.
instead?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jim, go ahead.
Oh, I come from this from a, you know, entirely different perspective than I think anybody in the room or on the screen.
Back
Because I had a role in drafting the bylaw that changed the manner in which the budget is presented. And I know, having done that work with Steve Jonas and with Gary Crossan, that we reserved unto the Finance Committee the right to create their own budget to present to town meeting. It is not the town manager's proposed budget. Town manager has the right to present her executive budget, her spending priorities. I think it's as of the end of January or something like that. But then the Finance Committee can basically take the document if they choose to, and, you know, put it on the coffee table and draft their own. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should do that, but I am suggesting that, you know, we need to, I think, assuming we're willing to do it, the majority of us, take a little bit more ownership about what it is that we think should be the budget that's presented to town meeting. Remember, it's our article. It's not their article, it's our article. And so we have the right and the authority to put whatever numbers we believe are appropriate to be in that article. In addition, as we all know, you know, the Finance Committee by statute has subpoena power. And we have the right to ask for information from any department we wish. I don't want to make work for anyone. And I agree with Louise. I don't want to have double efforts, and I don't want them to have to, you know, reinvent the wheel, but if now is the time that the departments are beginning to work on their budget, then we should consider contacting those departments and telling them, well, this is what the finance committee wants. And we're not contradicting what the town manager wants, but we might have other requests. We might have a different perspective. So in my view, all of this is entirely not only appropriate, it's exactly what the law requires. So I'm in favor of it, and I would like to see us take a little bit more of a leadership role in going to town meeting with our budget as opposed to simply adopting with few modifications what the town manager's requests are. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Dick.
I think, as we all know, the reality is that most of the budget is personnel or is headcount driven. And the larger amount of that is governed by contract. So essentially, what we're talking about here is staffing levels and the extent to, so I guess the question is our process appropriately designed to understand the need for the staffing levels that exist, and how do we get to the bottom of that?
So I think the budget is laid out very well in terms of salaries and wages and expenses as separate things. So I don't want to minimize expenses. I think there are.
No, but if you look at it, it's DPW is the only one that where the expenses are a significant portion of the total thing. Most cases, it's 75% of the budget is personnel versus expense.
So as it relates to personnel, I think it's just important for the liaisons to understand what programs each.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with it. I'm just saying that in most cases, that's going to be the area of focus because that's where the dollars are spent. And since we don't have any control over what they get paid, because it's basically driven by contract, the only issue that we have impact on is headcount.
Mhm.
We also have impact on programs. I don't agree with that.
No, I'm not disputing that. I'm just saying on a relative basis, 75% of it is driven by headcount.
Right, but 25% is what, 40 million, 30 million?
Well, it depends on your department.
Yeah, I got it.
That the functions of the personnel may potentially be able to support multiple programs. And so you could keep the same number of headcount while focusing on different programs.
And that is something that also is much harder to see in the budget right now.
Mhm.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. I would just let them know now.
Yes.
If that's what you're going to be doing.
Well, I would encourage the liaisons to
Yeah.
reach out. I think the initial discussion, actually most of the discussions, I think would be better at the liaison level. And then I think only at the very end, probably the last departments that we discussed would be these two at the finance committee level.
Okay.
So have we finalized all the assignments?
We have finalized the assignments. So my collection, let's see, I have it somewhere. So the building department, I believe, is Dick, Rick, and Barry. And then the planning department's Carol, Barry, and there's a third. Does anyone remember?
I think it's the big fat guy with the beard and glasses.
Excellent. We welcome your participation.
I bet you do.
You weren't supposed to jump to that so fast. You wanted you to say, which guy is that?
I have to do this twice.
So, yeah, so I would
The
encourage.
disguise is up.
I mean, it's Rick. I didn't think he was on that one.
I think I'm the sole liaison.
So the other liaisons, I don't mean to, tie anyone's back. The other liaisons should feel free to perform their
I
functions
think
as
the
they see fit.
DPW is too big right now, but
Yeah.
I think the library can start to do.
Okay.
Page count. Always the difficult part for me is just I'm very numbers driven and trying to multiply how many hours it takes to do a particular task and then figuring out how many hours, so not all positions work that way.
Right, so there's gonna be some
That's a little
estimation.
difficult, but obviously it's conversational. some
Yeah.
of it, but, figuring out how many people it takes to do certain programs is difficult.
But you might elicit feedback about what is being done that really the department manager doesn't think is a worthwhile activity. And also what are the things that they would prefer using the resources for, or would, suggest.
Or where
And
have
those are
things-
conversations. That's exact. I think they're gonna be conversations.
Or where have things shifted
Yeah.
and what could be, better utilized with different technology
Right.
versus,
Like planning has changed significantly, so has building.
yeah.
In the last 20 years.
And remember, several years ago, we actually pushed to expand the staffing level of the building department on the theory that prompt handling of permit applications would be a positive thing and drive more building and development in town. So this isn't necessarily in all situations going to be a cutting exercise. It's going to be a focused exercise on what's the purpose, what's the business purpose here, and how best to achieve it.
And where to spend those dollars.
Yeah.
Because it may be that we collectively decide, in the best interest of the town, that putting this expenditure in this area is better for the taxpayer than that area. And we sometimes will come into conflict with, the policymakers, but I don't consider that to be bad. I think it's a healthy exchange and a healthy debate.
Go ahead, Rick.
Josh, I'm torn here. For years now, I agree with Dick. We don't take widgets and turn them into raw product. We give a service and you need bodies to do that, which we have. I'm questioning my own level of expertise. I've been a liaison to the police and fire now for years. I think I know both of those departments like I know the back of my hand. But I'd be the last person to suggest to either chief about their personnel levels. And since Dick is right, the majority of this budget is bodies. And that's why we talk about the fact of moving around copiers, because we deal with, the 25% in expenses. And so although it's good that the finance committee take positions, I'm curious, when it comes right down to it, if other liaisons don't feel the way I do about that. And I know those departments well, and I question what they do, and I comment on everything that I see. But I'd be the last person to tell either chief how many bodies to have in a fire truck, or how many patrolmen to have on cars on the street. I just not my expertise. And if that's the expectation of this exercise, I'm struggling with that.
With respect to, I guess, the building department in particular, I think Dick was right. There was a discussion several years ago about how, there was shortage of staffing levels, a lot of turnover, and that was impacting the ability to, I think, do client-facing work or public-facing work. So the question might be, rather than, 2 part-time positions, would 1 full-time position be better? Something like that. I feel like those are the questions rather than, looking at the number of positions that need to be doing a very specific function, though that is something that could be suggested.
Right. With all respect, I sat in on that meeting, I listened to that gentleman talk, and one had to be catatonic not to suggest that they could use more staff to get what they needed to get done. And so in essence, it wasn't a difficult decision of this body at all to come up with that conclusion. It was just very obvious, but I'm wondering, shy of that kind of situation, how obvious is all of this initially? That's all.
On that specific thing, you may or may not recall, the town manager was not behind increasing that staffing position. And so picking up on Jim's point, that was a situation where the finance committee reached a different conclusion than the town manager, and that was what was ultimately approved in the budget.
And the other thing I would say, so if you're looking at police, and I won't talk about fire because I can't. If you're looking at police, I think the way Josh has his spreadsheet and the way he's thinking about this is, what is the goal? And the police chief would tell you the goal. So let's say it's community policing, whatever that means. And then the police chief would explain what that means. And then he would explain how he would achieve that.
Yeah,
What is
and how you
person-
measure it.
And then how would you measure that that was achieved? And, does he need 2 more police officers, 1 fewer patrol car, but 2 bicycles? I don't know, just making this stuff up, but I think that that's really, that's how I understand what you're thinking.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Setting up the metrics that measure the goals
goals.
as stated by the
The
department heads.
yeah.
And the metrics should be measurable. I mean,
Right.
because you want to track it over time and judge the success of each of these goals.
I think the major focus is rather than looking at last year's budget and saying, okay, 3% across the board makes sense. What's next?
Right. Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Does that make you feel more comfortable, Rick?
No, I understand the concept, yeah, and I'm not so sure if I'm more comfortable, but I certainly understand where we're going, and from that perspective, I understand that.
Who is co-liaison with?
Oh, so the building is Dick, Rick, and Barry, and planning is Carol, Jim, and Barry. Barry, by the way, I put on both so that there's a little visibility, across the 2 departments to see how it's going on in either of the departments.
Okay.
Okay, so.
Good.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay,
I'll invite you to my library meetings.
no, sorry,
As for
I'll
updates,
resign.
I don't
I
have,
may resign anyway, but I'll
Definitely resign after the meeting with the library. Okay.
I don't have any committee updates except to say I kind of like the remote or this hybrid format. Did anyone else have any feelings about how it worked?
I think
Just
we're-
out of curiosity, why didn't you guys come out tonight?
Because I'm in Chatham.
yeah, I'm in Mattapoisett.
And I'm in Syracuse.
What's your excuse?
Dick, don't drink the water.
Dave, where are you?
Yeah, I know that. I'll have to
But-
drink wine instead.
Yeah. Josh, I like this method too. And just from my perspective, maybe it's my hearing aids, but I have a little difficulty in the volume when different members on the committee speak. On those, to Dick and to Jim and to Dave on screen, it was as clear as can be as a normal Zoom, but I was having a little bit of difficulty. That's why I suggested earlier about the masks. I apologize if I made people feel uncomfortable taking them off, but is there any way to adjust the microphones?
I don't know how, but we'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But let's keep the same format for next week.
Yeah, there seems to be a base to the tone that maybe could be more trouble.
We'll ask the tech experts.
But it's definitely more
And the sound
interactive, I
mixing.
think, than
Yeah,
a
and
speech.
we should ask the technician behind the curtain right there.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
Thank you. Roll call, Carol,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Barry,
Yes.
Louise,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Rick.
Yes.
Yes,
Whichever one of us was asked, we both said yes.
I'm glad. And the chair votes yes. We're adjourned.